How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi, host of Tier Talk. And I had a great question sent my way. Tough question, because I've been working on it all day to answer. Even asked a few people that I know who got some good time in the field, good experience. And the question is, what do you do if you're a rookie correctional officer and your senior correctional officer partner constantly breaks the rules, doesn't follow policy and procedure, and in this case here, it's letting out too many inmates at once. So I believe the unit should only allow to have 6 or 8 out at once, and this person's allowing over 20. How do you address that matter? And I've been thinking about this because I have to remember how it was for me to be an officer, because I don't think this answer is that easy. So when we come back from the sponsors, I'm going to give it a shot. And please, guys, comment below. What would you do? Because this answer is really not that black and white. It's complicated. But stand by for our sponsors. When we come back, we'll try to answer the question.
I wanted to attend a university that had an intelligence program. I wanted to look at problems different. I wanted to increase my critical thinking abilities. AMU offered those avenues to expand. Obtaining your degree as an adult, you're actually paying yourself and investing in yourself. You can't put a dollar on it, it's priceless. It's something that can never be taken away from you.
American Military University. Learn from the leader.
Being a corrections officer takes its toll on even the strongest individuals. The constant need to perform at the highest level, putting your life at risk in a hostile environment, and the mental scarring of traumatic experiences. 31% of corrections officers show symptoms of PTSD, and 66% of people with PTSD also suffer with a substance abuse problem. The Transformations First Responders program is specially designed to help veterans and officers heal from the grips of addiction and PTSD in a comfortable, supportive, and serene setting. You are not alone. If you have questions about the services we offer, give us a call at 866-762-8454 to get more information on this affordable and life-changing program.
Okay, thank you guys for listening to our sponsors. Okay, so the question is again, you're a rookie CO, you're working with a senior officer that just keeps on breaking policy and procedure. In this case specifically, it's too many inmates out at once. Maybe you're only allowed 6 or 8. In this case, this officer is allowing out 20 or 22. So there's definitely a safety and security concern here. But what can you do after you've addressed the officer and the officer just doesn't want to listen? So first off, there's a couple of things I want to discuss before we even get into trying to answer it. So we have that blue code, correct? So there's that code of blue where we don't say anything. We don't want to snitch on our peers. When you evaluate the code of blue, or the blue code, if it exists, I don't think it exists the way we think it does, or for those reasons. I think the blue code really deals with us not wanting to be social outcasts, as opposed to us wanting to protect, I'll say corruption, but in this case, we're talking about just a violation of policy and procedure. But in general, blue code usually deals with officers that protect other officers when they know an act of corruption has occurred, that's what they say it means. So I don't think it deals with the fact that we're protecting corruption because that's what we do. I think it deals directly with the fact that we don't want to be a social outcast amongst our peers. So we don't want to say anything and then be an outcast from the people that we're going to work with every day on the front line. And that's important because don't forget, when you're in the academy and you're running through the training, they're building with you and your peers a sense of family, sense that you guys are connected no matter what, which, believe it or not, that sense of family really does develop from us versus them mentality. Sounds weird, but the instructors come at you hard and aggressive, and they want you to kind of like hate them a little bit. But in the process, what that does is that reinforces your connection with your peers. And I believe we take that closeness with us behind the wall, that family mentality, but it's also encouraged by or reinforced by the us versus them mentality. A lot of us believe that it's correctional officers versus inmates, or even sometimes correctional officers front line versus administration, which technically it's really not that. We shouldn't be walking around with us versus them mentality. It's definitely not a us and them, with us and the inmates, but it's not a us versus them. I'm not going to live my life stressed out every day. I'm still going to be wary of my environment. But anyway, so it encourages a sense of closeness, if you will. So if it's reinforced by that us versus them mentality, and you have an officer that just constantly breaking policy, and you want to approach them on it, and they don't listen, and now your next step is, well, unfortunately you're thinking about going to a supervisor. You're afraid because what? I'm going to become a social outcast. They're going to hate me. And now you're going to feel that you're stranded. You're alone. Vulnerable, if you will. So none of us want to be social outcasts, so sometimes we deal with shit that we shouldn't have to deal with, or we keep our mouth shut in regards to things that we shouldn't keep our mouth shut. And again, that relates to the sense of family, and obviously reinforced by the us versus them mentality. But when you have an officer that constantly violates policy and procedure, in this case with the inmates being let out, and they're not listening to anything that you have to say, and you tried approaching them multiple times, you have a safety and security issue here, at least for the scenario that was given to me. So it's not really a simple policy or procedure being broken. It's a safety and security concern. And if you work on that unit and something happens, you're going to have to explain yourself. You're going to have to, because policy and procedure was broken. And I like to think that it's good to have the new boots come in, because we have a lot of senior staff that, you're working in a routine job, and sometimes you become complacent, but the problem is it's an enemy of ours, because we don't know we're being complacent. So past practices may not be based on policy and procedure, and then one day when it gets challenged, you'll realize that. So when you get rookies that are straight out of the academy, they come in with things by the book, because that's all they know. And they want to make sure things are by the book. Then eventually they meet people with experience, and then there's a nice mold between experience and policy and procedure, but always stemming from policy and procedure, which means that, yeah, policies and procedures can change, we know that, but it has to have a foundation from why it didn't work from that policy and procedure. So again, you have a good working relationship. You have the officers that are new boots coming in, pushing what they know, which is policy and procedure, what they're being taught. And then you got the older boots who are, trying to push experience, but hopefully it's experience that's got a root in policy and procedure. But the last thing we want as training individuals, people that train, is we don't want to train complacency. So if I'm complacent, I don't want to train another officer to be complacent. So sometimes it's good to have that new cop come in, because they'll remind us, like, holy shit, that's right, that's not the practice. I've been doing this so long. Wow. I can't believe it's not policy. And you got to realize something. When shit hits the fan, that's the first thing people look at. They look at policy because that's definitive. That's where their ground is. So again, we're talking about this incident with the inmates, and something happens, and the investigator asks you what happened. Well, we had 22 inmates out, blah, 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 blah. 22. Can you go back for a second? You said 22 inmates. Well, policy here only says 6 or 8. So 22, that's a lot. It's just an everyday thing. So the policy you're going to be held accountable for. You trained on it. And if you go to the facility, they may have you sign one for the specific unit policy or for the specific job that you've been given. So ultimately, and it's kind of how these things work, if something was to hit the fan, and I got to bring it to this extreme because that's ultimately what I'm worried about. What happens when something hits the fan? That's what we have to always think about. We have to always think about what happens when something hits the fan. So we have to take it to that level. So, with that in mind, people will wind up going into survival mode when shit starts hitting the fan. And investigators, they know that. They're going to divide and conquer. That's how they do their investigations. They're going to divide and conquer. hoping that pressure on one could get them to speak. And it's very hard to really get people to stay united unless they're right. Then it's a lot easier to do so. But if there's something going on that's wrong, someone's always going to fold. Someone's going to fold to that pressure, or maybe they have more leverage on somebody than they do another. Plus, there's a lot of tactics that they can use to get someone to go into that survivor mode. So ultimately, when shit hits the fan, it's sad to say, but family mentality, especially if you have a good investigator, that may lessen. And now it's more about survival mode. I'm making this money. I got my family. I'm going to have to say something. So before it even gets to that point, before we get into that survival mode, because trust me, the person that they're going to try to get, because they're the ones that are lax with policy, most of the time they may not be the one that get in trouble. It may be just you, because it may have been your area where that person's job was affecting you, but it doesn't matter. At that point, you didn't say anything at that time, and therefore now you're going to be held responsible for your area, even though, again, it was this other person's fault. It doesn't matter, because you run your area. You're in charge, and you will be held responsible. That's why there's that sense that we have to police each other. And it's not just about, protecting us from the games that inmates play, but it's also protecting us from ourselves, things that we may not notice, the slow enemy of complacency, if you will. And it is a slow enemy, guys. So sometimes it could come in the form of a rookie cop coming up to a senior cop and saying, hey, listen, I know you got about 22 inmates out here, but policy only says 6 or 8. I know I just, signed for that. Why are all these inmates out? See if that person can justify. The person brushes you off and you try to approach them. Now you have to think, where do I go from here? Should I talk to a supervisor? And that's where the conflict is for us. Because then it goes back to that, what we feel is the blue code, and the feeling that this gentleman's going to be, or this female's going to be, a social outcast. But the right thing to do, especially if you feel that this violation of policy is threatening the safety and security of the facility, it's going to be to go to your supervisor. And hopefully they act. If not, you go up one more chain, but eventually you may have to start documenting. Especially, having the inmates sweat, that's definitely an officer that's laxed. Inmates, a certain amount of inmates are allowed out. That's all you get. That's it. And you try to stay to that policy, because that's what's going to protect you. So again, you bring it up to a supervisor in the hopes that they listen, correct the matter, and then the consequence, unfortunately, there's no way to sugarcoat it. You're going to know that you did the right thing, but then going back to work and having to deal with people that don't really quite understand your actions. But I may say something, though, a little hopeful thinking here. But if you're a rookie and you noticed these things were occurring and it bothered you, you can't be the only one else that noticed it. Could have been other people along the way that noticed it. So even though they're kind of cowardly because they didn't say anything, you may get somebody that's going to come up and say, hey, yo, I know you're going through a lot of shit right now, but what you did was the right thing. There's too many inmates out. I felt uncomfortable when I worked there. So, again, I don't know if that's wishful thinking, but I like to think that's true. I would like to think that there'll be some experienced officers that know that officer is kind of complacent in their ways and will back up what you did, because they've been there. They've done that. I had an issue once that was an awkward spot for me, where I got information that I had to run up with. I had no choice. You had to, especially because the person that gives you the information is going to document that they told you. I tried talking to the individual. Could give two shits about what I had to say. And I remember coming to line up one day and everybody's throwing dimes at my feet. But there were a few people, I'll never forget this, a few officers that took the money that was thrown at my feet and bought me a soda with it, because they understood the complex situation that I fell into. Wasn't looking for it. I just fell in on it. And at one point, I know we have the family aspect that I'm trying to connect, but that person's ignoring me. So what do? I have to say something, because ultimately I was put in this position where I have to. So sometimes in my case, it was the courtesy of telling somebody, which I don't even know if I should have done that. But the point is the courtesy of telling somebody, hey, listen, this person just called me and told me this. I don't have to tell you that, but I told you this, but I got to do something with it. I have to say something because my name's on that. And you'd understand that because we're family and you know that, but hey, I gave you the courtesy and I told you. So I think in this situation here, the officer doesn't go behind the other officer's back. He tells the officer, hey, listen, you got too many inmates out. Policy says this. I don't feel comfortable with it. Help me out, man. I gave you the courtesy. That's the family part of it all. I gave you the courtesy. Now you choose to push me off like I'm a piece of shit and not care what I have to say. But ultimately, I'm worried about, my job and having to explain my situation. Gave you the courtesy. You choose not to listen. I think going up to the next step isn't my choosing. It's you chose it the moment you didn't want to listen to me. The moment you brushed me off. So the only reason why I went to a supervisor is because you made me go to a supervisor. But it's a tough situation. I think it's a situation that a lot of us face. I really can't give the answer that most would like. Some may want us to give the answer that you don't say nothing. It's the code, and it's not the right answer. I can't give that answer, be comfortable with it. And some would say, well, if I told somebody, everybody's going to be okay with it. And that's not the truth. That's the conflict of our profession, the choices that we have to make that aren't so easy. But again, at one point, you have to ask yourself, what's going to happen to me if I don't say something? That survival mode aspect. And if you feel that you could be held responsible for the negligence of someone else's actions, then you go to the person, and if they don't want to fix it, you got to take the next step. And if you choose not to, don't try to bring it up later on, because you're going to be responsible now. Because it was in your area, you knew it was happening, and you didn't say nothing. You're only saying something now because shit hit the fan. So, that's it. That's my story. As always, guys, the show's Tier Talk. Please, guys, subscribe, interact, engage, and comment on this. I'm curious to see what you guys would do in a similar situation, or if it's even happened before. I'd like to learn. I think the advice I gave was good, but it's not easy advice to give. This is not a simple dialogue. So, as always, guys, subscribe, interact, engage. Please hit the bell. The bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Take care, guys. Be safe.